Hi guys. Have you ever heard of people going crazy after being alone for too long? I think that's what's currently happening to me. I think I'm losing my mind worse than it already was. I have one of these set up for each one of you, so I'm going to be reading to you. Hope you're doing well and having fun at your homes. We are on Wild Rescuers Escape to the Mesa, Chapter 6. Alright. The following morning, Stacy was at the farm with Everest, Basil, and Tucker. Basil was doing her laps while Tucker groomed Droplet and Splat, much to their dismay. Stacy and Everest stood just out of earshot of the others, or at least Stacy hoped it was out of earshot. They were supposed to be gathering kindling and mushrooms, but really Stacy was brainstorming ways they could get the taiga designated as protected land. She had confided to Everest her real motivation for leaving the cave the night before. "We need a camera," Stacy said to Everest. "If I were to take pictures of the pack and give them to Miriam, then she could show them to whoever is in charge of the national parks." Everest gave a sharp yip. Stacy knew he was still mad at her for lying about where she was going last night, but she went on anyway. "The problem is," Stacy continued, "what do I tell Miriam when she asks how I got the photos? Maybe I take them really far away and say that I spotted you on a hike? Or maybe I give her the photos and run away before she has a chance to ask me. That could work." Everest looked back at her again and huffed in frustration. "Yes, there's still the issue of how I get a camera," Stacy said excitedly. "I've had a few thoughts. From what I know about cameras, I can't exactly ask to borrow one from a camper. I'd have to take the little memory chip thingy to give to Miriam, and that would mean stealing something really valuable from someone. We can't do that. So hear me out, Everest. What if I were to get a part-time job in the village, washing dishes or something simple like that, only to make enough money to buy a cheap camera?" Everest let out a loud growl. More of a roar, really. He was definitely not a fan of her idea. "All right, boy, don't worry," Stacy said, patting his thick fur. "We'll think of something else." A few minutes later, Stacy waved goodbye to Droplet and Splat, who, thanks to Tucker, looked 100 times cleaner than when they arrived. Stacy set off toward the cave with Basil, Everest, and Tucker walking beside her. Normally, Stacy stayed very alert when she was walking through the forest with her wolves, but with Basil getting stronger every day and Everest by her side, she allowed her mind to wander. "We got enough mushrooms to make a stew for dinner. It's not my favorite meal, and the wolves won't touch it, but it's far better than fish porridge, that's for sure." Ew. "It can't just be a mushroom stew, though. I'll have to add something else to thicken it up. Beetroot, maybe? Or apples? Do apples go well with mushrooms? Do you think so?" I think that sounds absolutely disgusting. Stacy had just decided on adding wild leeks when Everest, Basil, and Tucker suddenly veered off course, ducking behind some large mossy boulders. "What's going—" "Stacy!" a male voice called out. Stacy spun around to see Jack, the man who had been camping with Miriam over the summer. Stacy recognized him instantly. She didn't have many conversations with humans, so the ones she had were fairly memorable. But more important, she remembered him because Jack told her what s'mores were. S'mores. Ever since that conversation, Stacy couldn't get the gooey dessert out of her mind. She'd even dreamt about them and how they would taste. Marshmallow-filled, melty daydreams that she had while staring at her large bowl of fish porridge. "Hi, Jack," Stacy answered as Jack jogged to meet where she was standing. "What are you doing off trail?" "Could ask you the same question," Jack replied with a wink. "Miriam and I were on a hike, but I brought my good camera, so I thought I'd head off trail for a bit and see if I could snap a photo of one of those white wolves everyone's talking about." Stacy looked down at the sturdy camera that hung around Jack's neck. "Had any luck?" Stacy asked nervously. Had Jack already seen us out walking? "Not yet," Jack said, much to Stacy's relief. "I was just about to get my binoculars out, though, to see if I could spot one." Jack gently took the camera from around his neck and set it on a nearby boulder. Next, he took off the backpack he was wearing and brought it around to his stomach, balancing it on his bent knee so he could open it. He fished out a large pair of binoculars and set the backpack on the ground at the base of the boulder the camera was resting on. "I'm going to get a little higher. Maybe I'll see something," he said, and began to scramble up a rock pile to where he had a decent vantage point over part of the taiga. He pressed the binoculars to his eyes and scanned the horizon, or at least see where Miriam wandered off to. Without any warning, a flash of white encircled Stacy. Whatever it was, it grazed her, knocking her a little off balance. She rocked back and forth on her feet and stumbled backward, catching herself on the boulder where the camera was. But the camera wasn't there. It was gone. "Jack!" Stacy yelled. "Your camera!" Jack scrambled down the rock rubble to where Stacy was standing. She was still rattled from whatever had brushed by her on the trail a few moments ago. "What happened?" he asked when he'd reached the bottom. "Are you all right?" "I'm fine," Stacy said. "But your camera. I saw something move in the bushes and then it was gone. I don't know what happened. I'm sorry." "Probably a raccoon," Jack said with disgust as he began looking around the boulder. He couldn't have dragged it far. "It might have gone that way," Stacy said, pointing in the opposite direction from where she knew Everest, Basil, and Tucker were crouching. "I'll keep an eye out too, and come back here if I find it, but I'd better be going. Good luck." Before Jack could ask her any more questions, Stacy slipped into the trees and zigzagged away from Jack, knowing the wolves would find a safe way to catch up to her without being seen. Sure enough, after about 3 minutes of walking silently through the forest, Everest suddenly appeared beside Stacy. Next, Tucker came up bounding behind her, and then Stacy saw Basil. Basil was in front of Stacy and holding something in her teeth. The camera. "Basil, you found it!" Stacy said eagerly, running up to her. Basil looked down in shame, and Stacy remembered the white flash. You stole it?" she said incredulously. "How?" Tucker walked up to Basil and looped his head through the camera strap Basil had clenched in her teeth. At the same time, Everest used his big body to back Stacy up against a tree. He nodded for her to stay still and then looked to Basil expectantly. Suddenly, Basil was gone. Stacy blinked and looked around and noticed the same white blur weaving in and out through the trees. It was Basil. She was sprinting so quickly Stacy's eyes could barely keep up with where she was going. And then Basil was back standing in front of Stacy and the others, panting heavily and waiting for Stacy's reaction. "You were never that fast before the lightning strike," Stacy whispered as she took a step toward Basil and ran her hand down her back. She didn't know what to think. Had the lightning given Basil some special ability? Tucker walked over and bowed his head, indicating that Stacy should take the camera that was around his neck. "Okay," Stacy began, taking the camera from Tucker and trying to put together the pieces of what had just transpired. "Basil, you must have overheard Everest and my discussion of why we need a camera. And it was you who took the camera from the boulder, not a raccoon, thanks to your new, super speed?" Tucker nodded enthusiastically while Everest beamed with pride. Basil gave Stacy one nod, still waiting to know if she was in trouble or not. "I'm not mad, Basil," Stacy said. "I'm just concerned. Let's go home. We'll take some pictures of you and the rest of the wolves tomorrow and figure out a way to get this back to Jack. But for now, I want you to rest." Stacy and the wolves set off back toward the cave, taking a slightly longer route to avoid passing through any clearings. They could stay safe in the shadows of the towering spruce trees. Stacy felt a weight around her neck that wasn't just the heavy camera. She was worried about what she'd seen Basil do. It worried her because deep down, she knew it wasn't supposed to be possible. The wolves had always been special. They took in a lost human girl. They could understand her commands and help to rescue small animals they'd usually hunt. But Basil's swiftness was not the same as exceptional intelligence and an unusual diet. It was superhuman speed, or in Basil's case, super wolf speed. And Stacy didn't know what to make of it. That was chapter 7 of our book, or chapter 6, sorry.